Before diving into this incredible story, remember to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Here, every story has something to say, and you won't want to miss a single one. In the opulent lobby of a New York courthouse, sunlight streamed through the large windows, illuminating the marble columns and meticulously arranged red carpets. Seated behind her desk, Judge Clarissa Johnson, a black woman in her 40s, exuded an aura of calm and dignity. Her past was marked by sacrifices and struggles to reach this position of power and respect. That morning, the court was hosting a high-profile trial, that of Victor Harrington, an arrogant billionaire known for his financial empire but also for his contempt for rules and those he considered inferior. Harrington, dressed in his bespoke suit, believing his money could buy anything, made a condescending remark as soon as he saw Clarissa. "Oh, you're the judge," he said with a smug smile, completely ignoring protocol and the gravity of the situation. "Are you sure you can handle this case?" Murmurs rippled through the room. The lawyers and assistants present felt the tension rising. Clarissa, though surprised by Harrington's blatant arrogance, didn't lose her composure. She knew the power of her position and knew that justice belonged to no one, not even a billionaire. Harrington didn't stop there. He leaned towards his lawyer and whispered loud enough for several witnesses to hear, "That woman, she should stay in her place." This was the last straw. Judge Johnson, aware that this humiliation was not only personal but symbolic, made a decision that would shock the entire court and soon, the whole country. She rose slowly, stared intently at Victor Harrington, and uttered words whose power sent a shiver through the room. "Mr. Harrington, today the law catches up with you, and what you thought you could ignore, you will bitterly regret." At that precise moment, no one in the room yet knew how far Clarissa Johnson would go to transform this humiliation into a lesson in justice and subtle revenge. But one thing was clear: Harrington had just met someone who would never be intimidated by money or arrogance. The morning sun still bathed New York City when Clarissa Johnson entered the courtroom, her firm step and upright posture inspiring respect and authority. At 42, this Chief Justice of the Court of Appeals had risen through the ranks despite the obstacles related to her skin color and the prejudices of the judicial system. Her reputation, relentless but fair. On that day, the court was filled with journalists, lawyers, and citizens who had come to follow the trial of one of the most powerful men in the city, Victor Harrington, a billionaire and business magnate, known for his arrogance and his contempt for laws which he considered too slow for him. As soon as Harrington caught sight of Clarissa, he gave a condescending smile and stared at her defiantly. He sat down, crossed his legs, and whispered to his lawyer. "Did you see who was assigned to us? That judge. I hope she doesn't spoil the show." The whisper spread quickly, and Clarissa's assistants exchanged worried glances. But Clarissa calmly settled behind her desk, meticulously reviewing her notes. She never let her emotions dictate her decisions. When Harrington tried to interrupt her by speaking to the audience and subtly ridiculing her, she looked up and said in a clear, firm voice, "Mr. Harrington, I remind you that this courtroom is a place of justice, not entertainment. Please remain in your seat." A heavy silence fell. The billionaire, more annoyed than humiliated, sneered and shook his head, thinking his money and influence could erase everything. But Clarissa knew exactly what she had to do. She had a strategy to remind Harrington that neither his power nor his wealth could bend her to his will. As he attempted one last sarcastic comment, she took a deep breath and said, "Today, you will learn that arrogance has never been a valid defense under the law. And what you have just done, I will make sure everyone knows it." The cameras lit up, the journalists took frantic notes, and Harrington felt for the first time a tension that none of his millions could erase. At that moment, Clarissa knew that this confrontation wouldn't just be a matter of legal justice, it would become a symbol. And she was ready to transform this humiliation into a public lesson that would leave the world stunned. After the hearing, Clarissa left the courthouse under a flurry of camera flashes, her face calm but determined. In her private office, far from the tumult of the courtroom, she considered how best to respond to Victor Harrington's arrogance. She knew that the humiliation she had suffered was not merely personal, it was a symbol of the contempt some still held for black women in positions of power. Clarissa immediately contacted her trusted assistant, Monique Reynolds, a brilliant and loyal young lawyer, to devise a plan. Monique, Harrington believes his money can buy anything. It's time to show him that some things can't be bought. I want us to devise a strategy that will catch him off guard. Monique nodded, knowing her boss's character perfectly, determined, intelligent, and ruthless. Together, they reviewed the trial file, noting every weakness and every legal detail that Harrington and his lawyers had tried to downplay. Meanwhile, Harrington left the courtroom laughing with his colleagues, convinced that Clarissa had no authority over him beyond that room. He was unaware that every word, every gesture of that day had been recorded and that a plan of retaliation was underway. Clarissa then contacted influential journalists, not to complain, but to highlight Harrington's behavior and show that there were figures of justice who would not be intimidated. She drafted a concise but powerful public statement. In a just system, no individual, regardless of their wealth or status, is above the law. This statement quickly spread across social media and local news outlets. Harrington, seeing his reputation tarnished by a single sentence, began to realize that this judge was not someone he could humiliate with impunity. Clarissa knew that the next move had to be more than just a confrontation, it needed to be a public, irrefutable demonstration that would prove justice and intelligence triumphed over arrogance and money. She already had a specific idea in mind, one that would surprise Harrington and captivate the public. The countdown had just begun, and the billionaire still thought everything was under control. But Clarissa Johnson had planned her move with the precision of a chess master, and every piece was ready to be moved. A few days after the hearing, Clarissa Johnson held a press conference outside the courthouse. Dozens of journalists, cameras, and microphones were present. The judge's intention was not only to denounce Harrington, but also to show the public that arrogance and wealth are not enough to disregard justice. Facing the journalists, Clarissa remained calm, her piercing gaze fixed on the crowd. She began. Today, I want to reiterate that the law is the same for everyone. No status, no wealth, no personal power can place you above the law. The flashes popped, capturing every word. But it was when she added. It is easy to mock those whom we consider inferior. But true greatness is measured by the respect we show to others and to the law. Victor Harrington, present in the media hearing and informed of the conference, felt the real pressure for the first time. His lawyers had warned him that Clarissa was not an ordinary judge, but he had never imagined that she would make such a direct and impactful public statement. Clarissa continued, tactfully exposing some of Harrington's arrogant and illegal behavior, but without ever attacking him personally. Every sentence was carefully calculated to make the audience think and tarnish the billionaire's reputation, all while remaining within the bounds of legality. Monique, at his side, noted every reaction from the journalists and was already preparing the next steps to maintain the pressure on Harrington. The billionaire, who thought he could use his media empire to turn the situation around, found himself caught in a web he no longer controlled. At the end of the conference, Clarissa concluded. Let this serve as a lesson, arrogance may impress temporarily, but justice always has the last word. The cameras kept rolling as she walked away, her sure and calm step echoing like a warning. Harrington, for the first time, understood that his wealth was no match for a judge who combined intelligence, dignity, and strategy. This conference was just the beginning. Clarissa had already planned the next step, an action that would publicly and irrevocably humiliate Harrington. The game had barely started, and the billionaire had no idea what awaited him. A few days after the conference, Harrington still believed he was in control. His arrogance remained intact, and he thought his wealth would allow him to erase any trace of public embarrassment. But Clarissa Johnson had meticulously prepared a legal trap, based on evidence Harrington believed had been forgotten or overlooked. In her office, Clarissa explained to Monique. Victor thinks his lawyers can get around everything. But we've discovered irregularities in several of his recent transactions. These documents, combined with his arrogant public actions, will create an irrefutable case. Monique nodded, impressed by the precision and depth of the plan. Every move Harrington made had been studied, every mistake noted and kept as evidence. The idea was not only to punish him legally, but to expose him to public opinion, revealing that his wealth was no shield against justice. Harrington, unaware of this preparation, continued his business meetings, his arrogance bolstered by the idea that Clarissa was powerless against him. He didn't know that his name would soon appear on the front page of newspapers across the country, not for his success, but for his illegal and disrespectful behavior. The day of the legal confrontation arrived. Clarissa presented the court with a comprehensive dossier, detailing every dubious transaction and every act of contempt for the law. The courtroom was silent. Harrington, for the first time, felt the gravity of the situation and the true weight of justice. Clarissa spoke with the same confidence that had marked her previous public appearances. Justice is not a matter of power or money. It is a matter of truth and responsibility. Today, every citizen, rich or poor, must understand that their actions have consequences. Harrington attempted to counterattack, but his arguments were quickly dismantled by the irrefutable evidence. The entire courtroom understood that Judge Johnson was never intimidated, and that Harrington had just met someone whose intelligence and strategy far surpassed mere arrogance. Outside the courtroom, journalists were already waiting, and Clarissa, serene, smiled slightly as she saw the cameras focused on Harrington. The billionaire, for the first time, was publicly humiliated, unable to use either money or influence to save himself. This legal trap was just the beginning of a series of actions that would leave the world stunned by Clarissa Johnson's intelligence and courage. After his legal defeat, Victor Harrington was furious. Never in his life had he faced such humiliation. His lawyers tried to reassure him, but he knew that Judge Clarissa Johnson had struck where it hurt most, his reputation. Harrington decided to retaliate publicly. He organized an extravagant press conference, hoping to sway public opinion using his charisma and millions. But Clarissa, always one step ahead, had anticipated this move. She had already provided the media with documents and evidence that clearly exposed Harrington's dubious actions. On the day of the conference, Harrington took to the stage, smiling confidently, ready to captivate the audience. But from the very first questions from the journalists, the tension rose. The documents Clarissa had provided were now being projected on the big screen, revealing illegal transactions, public arrogance, and contempt for employees and the law. Harrington's smile gradually faded. He tried to downplay it, to deflect attention, but each attempt was countered by precise and irrefutable facts. The billionaire's arrogance was exposed, not by personal attacks, but by the force of truth. Monique, sitting in the audience, watched with satisfaction as Harrington gradually lost all composure. Clarissa, at a distance, allowed the natural process of truth to catch up with arrogance. Each journalist asked increasingly pointed questions, and Harrington found no way out. At the end of the conference, Harrington left the stage, red with anger, realizing that his wealth and power were no longer enough to protect him. Judge Johnson, on the other hand, had succeeded in what she had planned from the beginning, transforming the humiliation suffered into a resounding demonstration of justice and dignity. This public victory strengthened her position and inspired those who had long suffered under the arrogance of the powerful. But Clarissa knew this was only the beginning. Victor Harrington, despite everything, was still dangerous and could attempt new maneuvers to regain control. She therefore had to remain vigilant and continue to play the subtle game of arrogance versus justice. Victor Harrington had never faced anyone like Clarissa Johnson. Every attack from her, every strategy to discredit him, had put him in a situation no amount of money could resolve. But the arrogant billionaire refused to back down, still believing he could manipulate public opinion. Clarissa, aware of his temperament, decided to increase the pressure in a subtle but relentless way. She launched a thorough investigation into all of his holdings and financial transactions, not just to punish him, but to expose the extent of his arrogance and lack of scruples. On the day the results were presented, the courtroom was packed, and this time Harrington could not ignore the gravity of the situation. Every document presented, every testimony from former employees who had been humiliated or exploited, painted a clear picture, that of a man who thought he was above the law and morality. Monique, beside him, whispered, "He's beginning to understand. He's finally seeing that his wealth isn't a shield." Victor Harrington, for the first time, lost his composure in public. His usual arrogance gave way to palpable frustration. He attempted to dispute certain points, but Clarissa, with Olympian calm, countered by citing the law and irrefutable evidence. Every sentence, every document presented, shook the billionaire. Public opinion, following the case live, began to seriously doubt his integrity and reputation. Harrington then understood that his downfall, both in the media and moral spheres, was inevitable. At the end of the hearing, Clarissa concluded with quiet authority. Justice is not a game of power or fortune. It is a constant reminder that every action has consequences. Harrington left the courtroom stunned and humiliated, feeling for the first time the true weight of his actions and his own arrogance. Clarissa, on the other hand, had managed to transform a personal affront into a public lesson, leaving everyone, including the billionaire, utterly stunned by her composure and dignity. But Clarissa knew there was one final step to close this chapter and ensure that Victor Harrington would never forget this lesson. Victor Harrington thought that after his latest public humiliation, he could still salvage some of his reputation. But Clarissa Johnson had planned the final blow. She knew that to end this series of affronts, an act combining legal justice and irreversible public humiliation was necessary. She contacted several key witnesses, former employees and business partners, who had long suffered under Harrington's abuses. With their testimony and the evidence already compiled, she planned a special hearing that would be broadcast on local and national media. This time, Harrington would be unable to hide or use his influence to divert attention. When the hearing began, Harrington entered, confident but already nervous at the sight of the packed courtroom and the cameras. Clarissa spoke calmly and firmly. "Mr. Harrington, today every act you have committed and every humiliation you have inflicted will be exposed to the public and recorded in the archives of justice." A heavy silence fell. The testimonies began: mistreated employees, wronged partners, and even some exploited clients. Each account demonstrated not only Harrington's dishonesty, but also his arrogance and contempt for the law. Then, Clarissa revealed a key document, a fraudulent contract signed by Harrington himself, directly linking his fortune to illegal practices. The billionaire paled. This document, combined with the testimonies and evidence already released to the media, made any defense impossible. "There, Mr. Harrington, is the result of your arrogance," said Clarissa, her tone firm but measured. "This is not personal revenge. It is justice catching up with those who think they can ignore it." At that precise moment, the cameras captured the scene. Harrington, for the first time in his life, was completely overwhelmed, humiliated, and defenseless. His millions and his power were useless against Clarissa Johnson's intelligence, strategy, and dignity. The live broadcast went viral. The media picked up on every detail, and Harrington became the symbol of arrogance punished by law. Clarissa, however, remained calm, her authority undiminished, aware that she had transformed a personal affront into a public lesson the world would not forget. This final action marked a turning point. Harrington had been exposed, humiliated, and the public had witnessed the power of a black woman in the face of arrogance and power. Humiliated and angry, Victor Harrington refused to remain passive. He attempted one last counterattack, believing he could discredit Clarissa Johnson and regain control of her reputation. He hired powerful lawyers and communications consultants, ready to use any means necessary to turn the situation around. But Clarissa, anticipating this maneuver, had already prepared an implacable defense. She knew that Harrington would not be able to withstand the public exposure of his mistakes and that he would end up self-destructing. When Harrington launched his media campaign, he began by attacking Clarissa personally, insinuating that she was exaggerating and manipulating the media. But every accusation was immediately refuted by irrefutable evidence, recordings, official documents, and consistent witness statements. The media, now aware of the truth, refused to broadcast his false attacks. Monique, observing the scene from Clarissa's office, noted, "He thought he could scare us with lies. But we had everything planned." In a packed courtroom, Clarissa calmly responded to Harrington's accusations. "Mr. Harrington, I did not create this evidence. Your own actions speak for themselves. The truth cannot be manipulated by lies or suppressed by fear." Harrington felt his last chance slipping away. Every word he uttered in his defense only reinforced the image of his arrogance and his failings. The entire courtroom, including his own lawyers, realized there was no way out. At the end of the hearing, Clarissa concluded calmly. Arrogance and power may impress temporarily, but they can never eclipse justice and truth. Harrington's latest attempt to salvage his reputation had backfired, exposing once again his inability to respect the law and others. Clarissa Johnson had turned her adversary's every move into a public lecture, leaving the billionaire utterly humiliated and powerless. The whole world watched, stunned, as a man who thought he could control everything fell from grace, and as a black woman who embodied justice, intelligence, and dignity rose to greatness. Victor Harrington was now on the brink of disaster. His latest efforts to salvage his image had failed, and each new revelation seemed to deepen his humiliation. The national media meticulously reported his misdeeds, and the public saw him for what he truly was, an arrogant man, incapable of respecting the law or those around him. Clarissa Johnson, for her part, showed no sign of personal triumph. Her goal had never been to humiliate for pleasure, but to demonstrate that justice and dignity surpass arrogance and wealth. At the final hearing, she announced severe, perfectly legal sanctions that struck Harrington where he thought he was untouchable. His companies were placed under strict surveillance, his dubious practices were publicly exposed, and he was barred from certain major transactions until he made amends. "Mr. Harrington," Clarissa said in a firm but calm voice, "you have been warned and ignored. Today, justice leaves you no escape. Your actions have consequences, and you must answer for them before the law and the public." Harrington tried to protest, but there was no support left. His lawyers had lost all credibility, and his financial allies were beginning to abandon him. The entire courtroom, including the press, witnessed this triumph of justice over arrogance and wealth. Leaving the courthouse, Harrington was a broken man, humiliated before the entire world. His millions were no match for Clarissa's strategy, patience, and intelligence. For the first time, he understood that respect and justice cannot be bought, and that arrogance can become one's own prison. The stunned public applauded Judge Johnson for her strength, insight, and courage. Clarissa had transformed a personal humiliation into a national example of justice and integrity, leaving Harrington in the shadow of his own arrogance. A few weeks after Victor Harrington's public downfall, the city, and even the entire country were still talking about the affair. The media were still broadcasting images and documents revealing the billionaire's excesses and arrogance. Harrington, once feared and admired, was now a symbol of pride punished. Clarissa Johnson, for her part, continued her work with the same rigor and dignity. But this victory had a far broader impact than on just one man. It inspired thousands of people never to be intimidated by power or wealth. Women and men of all backgrounds saw in her an example of courage and justice. In an official speech, Clarissa declared, "What we have witnessed is not merely the downfall of an arrogant man. It is a reminder to all, justice, truth, and dignity are never for sale, and no fortune can eclipse them." Victor Harrington, for his part, now lived in seclusion in his luxurious but silent offices, aware that his arrogance had been exposed and his reputation irreparably damaged. His attempts to regain respect failed one by one, and his every move was scrutinized by the public and the media. The whole world had witnessed the transformation of a personal humiliation into a lesson in justice and moral power. Clarissa Johnson had not only avenged the affront she had suffered, but she had also sent a clear message. True power lies not in money or status, but in courage, integrity, and the ability to stand up for what is right. As the cameras captured her last words of the day in the courtroom, Clarissa smiled slightly. Harrington had thought he could dominate her with his wealth and arrogance. He had failed. And in the respectful silence of the room, everyone understood, Judge Johnson had won far more than just a trial. She had won the public's eternal respect and made history with her triumph.